Hi, I'm Tim Gore. Today on Who Else Loves History, we are live, and we invite your interaction to honor history through remembrance as we commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Over the course of the next hour, we'll share first-hand accounts from Holocaust survivors, insights and stories from family members of survivors, and examples of organizations educating future generations about the Holocaust. We invite you to share your questions, your comments, and your memories in the chat. International Holocaust Remembrance Day was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 2005 through Resolution 60/7. It designated January 27th, the day that members of the Soviet Army liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in 1945, as a day to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust and promote education to prevent future genocides. We begin our program of commemoration and education with excerpts from interviews I had the honor to do with George Spooner and Ilse Altman. They share their first-person memories of how their lives were changed forever by Nazi policies and actions before World War II even began.
I was born in Vienna. My father was born in Vienna. My grandfather was Austrian. We're Austrians. But when the Nazis took over, and we being Jews, that is exactly what you were not supposed to be. I'm 9 years old. I'm in 4th grade. School would start with the blessing, and we would recite the Lord's Prayer. I did not because I was Jewish. All the boys in the class would stand up and would recite the Lord's Prayer. Unser Vater, wer ist im Himmel, our Father who art in heaven, etc., etc. Then school would start. Within a matter of a couple of weeks, my friends, my school chums, 9 years old, would show up with short pants and brown shirts and little swastikas on their arms, maybe a little knife on their side. They were really Hitler youths. Youth for Hitler. They still recited the Lord's Prayer, but as soon as they finished the Lord's Prayer, they raised their hand in a salute to Hitler and pledged their allegiance to Hitler. And then school would start. When I was 9, I went across the street from where I lived to play with a friend of mine. And my mother told me to be careful. And as I was about to step from up to the curb, sidewalk from the curb, I was approached by 3 Hitler youths. And they were probably 10 or 12 years old. And as I wanted to get up, I saw them coming towards me, so I went left. And when I moved to the left to get up on the sidewalk, they moved to the left. Then I moved to the right, and they followed me again. I had no choice. I had to meet them head on. And I did. And they looked down at me, and one of them said, "Are you a Jew?" I'm 9 years old. I didn't want to be beaten up. I wet my pants, I admit to that. And I denied my faith. I said, no, I'm not a Jew. One of them said, "Oh, he's a Jew, all right." Another one said, let him go. They probably spotted somebody else down the block. And I ran to my friend's father's house, who took me by the hand and led me back across the street to safety of where I lived. And 2 things I have never forgotten. 2 things I learned, which I maintain to this day. Number 1, I am a Jew. Most importantly. Number 2, it's bad being a Jew. To this day, these are 2 things that have stayed with me.
Thank you for that, George. And hopefully many members of our student audience and the audience here are aware of an event that occurs in November of 1938,
Yes.
Kristallnacht, a significant event, obviously, in your life because your family's history changes immediately at that moment in time.
My father was arrested the following day, and he and 30,000 other Jewish men were arrested, most of them from Austria, because the largest Jewish population that was left was in Austria. And Hitler wanted to get rid of them. Get rid of the Jews, that's what he said, before the final question came in. My father wound up in a concentration camp in Dachau, the first concentration camp built by the Germans. And you can imagine my mother, her friends, where's my husband, where's my brother, you know, where's my father? They were gone. In some instances, it took weeks. My mother found out within 2 weeks. We got a postcard. My father saying that he was in Dachau, the block number and the cell number, and that we knew he was alive. Hitler wasn't killing the Jews yet at that particular time. However, of the 30,000 men that were picked up, most people don't know this, only 90% made it to the camps. 10% never even made it to the camps. Old men had heart attacks. There were beatings. There were shootings. People tried to escape. They were killed. 90% only made it to the concentration camps. And of those, only 90% survived, my father being one of them. He was there for 3 months, and in the 90-day period, he lost 90 pounds in weight. So you know what he had to eat, very little. The brutality of what was going on, he told me about all of those things. But I had to do it later when I was able to understand it.
You obviously were afraid. Your mother was very afraid. Your father's in Dachau.
Right.
And she learns there is a thing called the Kindertransport?
Immediately after that, the English, the only people who opened their hearts, realized what was going on and helped in rescuing. Of the 1.5 million children that were killed in the Holocaust, 1.5 million children that were murdered, 10,000 survived because the English said, we've got to save some of these kids. And they instituted what they called the Kindertransport, a transport of children. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the 10,000 children that went on the Kindertransport and was sent to England. I'm 10 years old and I'm settled by myself.
This is 1939?
This is 1938, December of 1938.
And so, we've got a picture that we can share. You don't originally go to a family, you're in some sort of like youth camp?
First they sent you a camp, and from a camp you were sent to either family, another camp, because there were so many children coming in. And this is a picture of the summer of 1939, before the start of the Second World War, where I was in a town called Ramsgate, which is on the seashore, a sea resort. And I was there in a Quaker home, a group home, with about 8 or 10 other children who they took care of us at that particular time. I'm 10 years old and I'm on that picture. I was with group homes. I was sent out to families, to various camps, wherever it was convenient at that time, because children were still coming in. I bless the English people. They were the only ones that said we have to take these children unequivocally. And they did rescue 10,000 of us. And I fortunately was one of them.
We were at dinner. It was November and it was cold. And it was peaceful for the moment. And then all hell broke loose. All the windows were broken at the same time. And guns were going off. And it was just awful, awful, awful noise. And we put our coats on, went across, and we went in the root cellar, and we smelled smoke, and Dad said, here goes our house. And it was cold, and it was damp, and my little sister was born. She was about 3.5 months old. And the great aunt lived with us, and she was complaining. There was no light. And I could feel the tension between Mom and Dad. I could feel how concerned they were. And, you know, no light, cold. It was very, very frightening. And we watched for daylight. And as soon as we saw daylight, we walked back to our house, and it was totally destroyed. There was nothing left, absolutely nothing left. The pictures of the wall, the bedding was cut open, all the dishes were destroyed, everything, and they're taking the clothes out of the closet. And years ago, you didn't have cans, so you preserved vegetables and food in jars. And they had opened all the jars and poured it on the clothes. So you can imagine the mess there was. It was just unbelievable. And my parents just stood there. And of course, my brother and I were crying, you know, we were frightened. And finally, Dad decided that maybe it just happened in our little town. And he suggested that we go to Kassel, which is the next largest town. And we sort of cleaned ourselves up and we walked down the street. And I want you to know, nobody, but nobody came and said, "Are you okay? Is there anything we can do for you?" We saw them peeking behind the curtains. In order to get to the train station, we had to go past our synagogue, our house of worship, and we realized why we smelled smoke. They had destroyed all prayer books, all prayer shawls, and they were in the middle of the yard, and they were set on fire and they were burning.
George was eventually reunited with his mother and father in England, and they were able to emigrate to America. At age 16, Ilse Altman made the journey from Germany to America alone, traveling via train and truck across Europe before gaining passage to freedom on a ship. Millions of others were not lucky enough to find freedom before the war began. As I mentioned earlier, Holocaust Remembrance Day occurs on January 27, the day of liberation for those imprisoned in the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. But for the Soviet forces and the world, the excitement and joy of that liberation was mixed with the tragic reality that was revealed once the world learned what had happened there. Holocaust survivors George Brady and Rachel Miller have very personal connections to the horrors of Auschwitz. We are honored to share their stories of remembrance.
In his right mind, who's normal, can imagine what Auschwitz was, right? Because it was a shock like you cannot imagine, because we traveled in a cattle car for about a day and a half without food and just a bucket in the corner for a toilet, and so you are pretty tired. The luggage was with us, we were sitting on the luggage. And when we arrived in Auschwitz in the middle of the night, suddenly the door opened and there is screaming, "Get out, get out." And there were barbed wire with floodlights, and there was the barbed wire, it was electric tension, and there were SS guys, the guards with leather jackets and German shepherds barking, and it was a nightmare like you cannot imagine. And then they sorted us out, the ones they felt they can still kill you through labor, and who didn't look strong enough, so they sent them straight to a gas chamber. One of the prisoners who was pushing us out of the trains was a Czech guy, and he told me, "Say that you are healthy." And I didn't know what he meant, but when we lined up in front of Dr. Mengele, who with his finger to the right or to the left pointed, I told him I'm healthy. I said, "Gesund." And whether that made it, but the fact is that there were 3 boys, 2 of my friends and me, and I went one way and the other boys went the other way. And at that point, when I looked at the groups and we looked like the strong ones and they looked like the weak ones, I thought that I am going for hard labor and they go on light labor. So as it turned out, we were going to work and they were going to straight to a gas chamber. And you could see in the background a huge flame, dirty flame, but big one. We thought again some factory or couldn't figure what it was. Only the next day we found out that it was the crematorium where they burned 2,000 bodies at a time, just in one day. And then you realized it was your friends or your family or son going up in smoke.
These are actual documents that you received after the war which tell you the fate of your family, correct, Rachel?
Right.
So you actually learn when they went to Auschwitz.
That's my mother. But it's very interesting. There is no cause of death. But if you go to the next one, it's for my brother. Mm-hmm. And there on the bottom, they were taken July 30th, 31st. And my brother Adolphe died the 1st of October, 1942 at 9:30 p.m. Cause of death, I can't see it, excuse me.
No, right, go right ahead.
Cause of death, enteritis with bodily weakness. You know what they did? They would open up a medical book, and wherever landed in the medical book, they would just put it on the cause of death. And they did that for my brother, and they did that for my 2 brothers. not for my mother, not for my sister, which means that when my mother and my sister arrived at Auschwitz, they were to what is called the spa, which was actually the gas chambers. And what they did when they walked into the camp, there was a sign that says Arbeit macht frei, which means work makes you free. And they would tell them that they're going to be showered, and they would have an orchestra playing, and they would have an orchestra playing by the gas chambers too, which they called the spa. And they would tell the people to get undressed and to fold their clothes very, very neatly, and to tie their shoes together, because in those days all shoes had to be tied, the laces, and to put them under their seat, and then they would send them into the showers, and then they would throw in the gas, and that's how they died. So my mother and my sister died as soon as they arrived in Auschwitz. My two brothers lived. Adolphe lived for 2 months, and Henri lived for 6 months.
After the war, Rachel made it to America, got married, and started a family, and became very involved in Holocaust education efforts. George immigrated to Canada, but without his sister Hannah, who died in Auschwitz. As Soviet forces were moving in from the east, other Allied forces were racing across Europe after defeating the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge, liberating other concentration camps, including Buchenwald, in 1945. Ben Fainer was one of those liberated. Ben was just 9 years old when the German blitzkrieg of September 1939 attacked his home in Bedschen, Poland. Within 2 days, Ben, his mother, father, and siblings, along with 25,000 other Jews from the area, were rounded up and sent to forced labor camps, concentration camps, or death camps. In this first-person flashback, Ben shares his story of surviving 6 years in concentration camps.
My dad and I went on one truck, my mother and 3 siblings, which is my other brother, my two sisters. One of the young, was only 8 days old, was a girl, and they went with my mother. 3 of them went with my mother, and I went with my father. We went to a forced labor camp.
And so you marched to this forced labor camp?
No, we were driven to the forced labor camp.
And when you just say a forced labor camp, let the audience have a sense of what that is. What did you do?
We didn't do too much probably the first few months. They segregated most of the guys where they can use them in different trades. My father was a tailor, his craft was, and they used them for various things to make uniforms. They separated the young guy. I didn't do too much at that time except maybe clean.
Now you were 9 at the time.
I was 9, yes.
But you were big for your age.
I was big.
So
my father was about over 300 pounds, about 6'6", I believe, somewhere in that vicinity.
Oh my goodness, a big man.
So I was a big kid.
And so normally, I guess a 9-year-old boy probably would have gone with his mother.
But I wasn't 9 years old.
You told them you were.
I was 15.
And they believed you because of your size.
They believed him because of my size, yes.
And so because you lied about your age, you ended up with your dad.
I ended up with my dad in the forced labor camp.
And you did not know then where your mother and siblings were sent, but you learned later.
Not for probably for several months that we were told that my mother and siblings went to Auschwitz.
And did you ever see them again?
No.
And so then you spent your time in the war moving in essence from one forced labor camp to another.
Not from one labor camp to concentration camps.
You went from the forced labor camp, which was still in Poland, or were you in?
That was still part of Poland. It was called Yelishnia.
Yelishnia.
Yeah.
And then from there, you marched to the first.
We marched to Blechhammer.
And that was in Germany?
That was in Germany.
So
yes.
A sense of how the distance?
I don't know, maybe 40, 50 miles, we never know the distance. Who cares about the distance? We march, I'm hoping we get there.
And so you spent how long a period of time then at that first concentration camp?
The first concentration camp in Blechhammer, we spent probably better than a year, close to a year and a half probably.
And at that point, were the concentration camps being run by the SS yet, or were they still under
At that time, they were still under the Wehrmacht. If you know what the Wehrmacht is. They were the regular soldiers.
And then during your time there is when that
changed?
changed?
There was a big change between that when the SS took over, and my name was no longer, my Jewish name is Bendit, which is B-E-N-D-E-T, and Fainer, which was F-A-J-N-E-R. So my name was changed to 178873, which I have my number on my hand.
Would you mind sharing?
No.
this happened at that first concentration camp
This
after
happened.
the SS
This
took
happened
over.
in Brahma.
And so immediately...
I bruised my arm, but you can see part of it. I hit it against the shower the other day.
And I see that. You've got
Yeah.
a bit of a bruise
Yeah.
here. And I don't know if it's going to be possible. Yes, we can get right there. So when the SS comes in and takes over the camp,
Yes.
it becomes much more...
Well, we got our tuxedos, which I'm sure you saw, you know, the blue and white. Okay, there are no more plain clothes, but we've had the plain clothes for God knows how long. And we got our
So at
stripes.
this point, you get into the striped uniform.
Correct.
And you're living in barracks? How would you
We were
describe
living in
the
barracks.
place you're living?
Barracks, just regular barracks.
And I should think of them like the pictures we see from World War II, the
Bunk
wooden
beds.
bunk beds?
Yes,
The number that you were given,
yes.
in essence, that was just the number they were up to? They just arbitrarily gave you that number and put it on a log book or something?
Yeah,
to
so we
identify
found out
you?
log well after the guy, they had a bunch of guys, maybe, I don't know, about 20 or 30, that they grab your arm like this, and they had a humongous pen like you have, and they just poked like that in. So it's been there for 100 years. Not quite 100, but you know.
Not quite 100
Yeah.
jet bed. Hopefully you'll
Yeah,
be
well,
around.
I intend to keep it for better than 100.
Excellent. So then, what did you end up doing in the camp as to survive your job?
In Blechhammer, I actually didn't do anything except when the guys went out at 3 o'clock in the morning after the count was taken, they went to a factory. I was left behind, and I used to clean the office, you know, and whatever shoes was shine, they shined them equally as good as mine, like my shoes shined. I learned that and cleaned up and everything. So when the guys came back, whatever it was, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, they took me back to the camp, you know, and after they counted everybody, we went to the barracks.
And you did not stay at this camp for the entire war. You then were transferred again.
I beg your pardon?
You were then shifted again to another.
Oh yes, after a
concentration
while,
camp?
yes, we went to a better hotel, a 5-star.
Yes, you're being
We
very.
went from Blechhammer, we went to Buchenwald.
Buchenwald, which is probably a name that many people are familiar with when they hear
Yeah,
about
I'm sure they
concentration
do,
camps.
yeah.
And it's not a 5-star
At
hotel at all.
Buchenwald, you know, well, you know, and Buchenwald, I already went to work. We used to get up 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was accounted for. Then we marched out and went to the factory. So what they produced, most of the time, I never knew, because we used to shift the stuff around towards the end, whatever the production was. They made parts for trucks, maybe parts for airplanes or whatever. And Buchenwald was very, very tough. Buchenwald was the toughest one of all.
Tell me a little bit about that. When you say tough, give the sense of what.
Well, in the sense it's tough. The wires were higher. They had the big lookout towers with machine guns. And of course, if you marched to work and if you dropped, you got a bullet in your head and kicked off to the side, and the birds used to have a good meal. Buchenwald was horrifying. You marched, you know, and a lot of times people ask you, well, what did you do? Did you have any kind of recreation? I says, yeah. Yeah, the recreation is just, we were alive. That was the recreation that we've had. You never got anything, somebody like maybe radio or something? Who the hell a radio? You gotta be kidding me, you know. I lived in block 15, happened to be, and we had a crematorium right beside me. So, you know, a lot of people ask me, well, what happens if you're sick or something? Was that a hospital? I says, yes. When they were sick and you couldn't make it, I used to see guys shoved in the crematorium while they were alive. There was no such a thing as, you know, being sick. Either you make it or you don't. So I'm here to tell you the truth, to tell you this here, and I've mentioned this to quite a few times when I speak to children and grown-ups. Why I'm here today, I've yet to figure out. I had a good God watch over me, and the devil used to push me.
You were not in Buchenwald for the rest of the war.
No. Oh, God, no. No, we marched from Buchenwald, we went to Flossenburg.
Flossenburg, and that's
Yes.
another, what, 30, 40 miles?
Somewhere in that vicinity. You know, to the present day, I've never found out the mileage, because I could care less, to be truthful with you. But we marched in hail, rain, or snow, whatever it was, and we spent X amount of, probably almost better than a year in Flossenburg. The most time we spent was in Buchenwald.
And were you in Flossenburg at the time of liberation?
No. We went from Flossenburg, we went to Dachau, and from Dachau, for some ungodly reason, they moved us back around and took us back to Flossenburg. And from Flossenburg, we marched Where we were going to go, I really don't know, but we were liberated marching from Flossenburg, which is part of Bavaria, and we ended up in Cham, Germany, and that's where I was liberated.
In Cham.
Yes.
And that is April of 45?
April of 23rd of April of 1945 at 10 o'clock in the morning.
After 6 years in forced labor and concentration camps, Mr. Fainer was 15 when liberated. He eventually emigrated to the United States, where he and his wife Susie had 7 children. Today, we are 81 years removed from the end of World War II, which means stories of the Holocaust and memories of the survivors must now be shared by children, grandchildren, and other family members, and preserved in books, online records, museums, and education centers. We share examples of how that is happening in our next 3 stories. First, producer Paul Shankman introduces us to Georgia Hunter, author of We Were the Lucky Ones, an historical novel based on her family's history. Then producer Susan Vanderhoff takes us to the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum for 2 stories. To meet Vera Emmons, who shares the story of her mother, Gerda Luner, and to show us how that museum's education programs are focused on preventing future genocides.
For millions of European Jews in the 1940s, that sound signaled the beginning of a journey that would end in a Nazi death camp. But a lucky few heard a different sound. A sound that meant escape and survival. And as author Georgia Hunter eventually learned, her family was one of the lucky ones.
You had no idea?
No idea. No idea.
Georgia Hunter was a teenager before she learned her grandfather, an immigrant who went by the name Eddie Kortz, was really a Holocaust survivor born Addie Kirk, one of 22 members of a family of Polish Jews who by cunning and courage and luck escaped the murderous grasp of the Nazis. But they did not flee together, or even in the same direction. Now, decades later, Georgia Hunter has pieced together her remarkable family's true story and turned it into a gripping work of historical fiction.
It never felt like a burden. It was always just something I wanted and needed to do. It almost felt like an honor to do it. So I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned.
We Were the Lucky Ones spent 4 months on the New York Times bestseller list and has been translated into a dozen languages, with more to come.
My goal in writing it was to make it not feel like a lesson in history, but to have my readers step into the shoes and hearts and minds of these family members so they could imagine what it was like.
At her book signings, along with offering a personal inscription, Georgia Hunter always includes a special salutation, with courage, perseverance, and love. They are the themes of her novel and the traits at the heart of her 9-year quest uncovering the extraordinary story of the Kirk family's odyssey of survival.
How much of what's in there is actually true as opposed to the details you had to fill in?
I get asked that a lot because it is almost an unbelievable story when you read it. But the narrative of who was where and when is all based on truth. It's all research. Where the fictionalization came in was with those more colorful details, like what were they thinking and feeling.
This was when you were 15 when you first discovered all this, but it was a few years later that you decided to write this.
About 5 years later at a family reunion, I kind of wandered outside to where my mother's generation was sitting and talking and telling stories about the war, and sat down, and that's when I heard these snippets of the greater Kirk family story about the cousin who was born in Siberia and the siblings who were married in an illegal ceremony in Lvov, and ghetto escapes and false IDs, and the stories kept coming and coming. And I remember sitting there thinking, how have I never heard these stories before, and how has no one taken the time to write them down?
The title of the book, We Were the Lucky Ones.
Yeah.
Was that the original title? Was there a working title, and how did you settle on that one?
That family reunion back in 2000 when I was 21, sitting around that picnic table. Felicia was there. Felicia is a character in the book who you meet. She's a daughter of my grandfather's sister, Mila. She was a year old at the start of the war, and so sadly her childhood was consumed with knowing nothing but the Holocaust. And at the end of the night, Felicia spoke up. She'd been a bit quiet that night. And she spoke up and she looked around at all of us and she said, you know, it's almost a miracle that we are all here today. We really shouldn't be. And then she said, we were the lucky ones.
My mother's early childhood, she had a very close family. She lived in Berlin. She had a younger sister and her two parents. Her grandparents on her mother's side also lived in Berlin in a very beautiful house. They were very influential in the Jewish community in Berlin. This is a photograph of my mother on the right and her sister Vera on the left in 1939. So my mom would have been 12 and Vera would have been 10. And my grandparents, my grandfather Max and my grandmother Adele. And then in 1933, Hitler came to power and life changed very quickly. My grandfather was a judge, and so he lost his job within, you know, in my mother's estimation, weeks or a month maybe, because no Jews would be allowed to have any kind of influence in a courtroom. School changed. The flag of Germany changed. The swastika became the flag of Germany. She remembered being outside in a little park as the flag was changing, and she remembers the looks on her parents' faces. And that's when she was 5. And I think there were fond memories after that, but that was a big turning point. My grandparents were there until March of 1943 when they were deported. They never were able to get out of Germany. My mother and her sister were sent to Jewish foster parents in Holland in June of 1939. And my mother didn't go back to Germany, but her younger sister ended up back in Berlin with their parents and was deported with them in March of 1943. She was in 6 concentration camps. So she was in the first concentration camp in southern Holland, and then she was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and in 4 other concentration camps, kept getting moved. And she was doing labor in all of them. But she was with a group called Phillips, the Phillips Group. She was saved by the Phillips Corporation. So Fritz Phillips of the Phillips Corporation. A Dutch corporation, and once Holland was taken over by the Nazis, they had to work for the Nazis. Mr. Phillips set up a factory. He went to the Nazis, the Gestapo was running this concentration camp in southern Holland. And he said, let me use Jewish women. They have more dexterity in their fingers, which isn't true. But that was believed, the Gestapo believed it, so he had working for him, not getting paid. Again, it was slave labor, and the goods were going to the Nazis. About 800 Jewish women in this concentration camp, and it saved her life, even though she wasn't working for them all the way through, because they got extra food, a little bit, a couple hundred calories a day, paid for by Phillips and brought in by Phillips. They were working inside, and they worked a little bit fewer hours. She was liberated just before her 18th birthday. We're going to walk through the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, and I'll point out a few things that I talk to when I'm taking a group through the museum, because I serve as both an educator and as a second-generation speaker. Almost everything you see in this museum is anything personal is related to somebody who lived in St. Louis, a survivor who came to St. Louis. So we have around 900 survivors who came
to St. Louis after the war, and in this gallery we have photos of many of them with their families, at work, through the years, family events. All of this was so important to them, and on this wall we have a moving list of everybody so we can see everybody's name. It's really, really important to see the names of people. This is a photograph of Gus Schoenfeld. He came to St. Louis after the war. As far as we know, he is the only survivor in this photograph. Gus grew up to become a very prominent doctor here in St. Louis and was on the team that developed the drug Lipitor, which is a cholesterol-lowering drug. The significance of that, besides the millions of lives he helped save, is this is one person who lived. What about the others, the millions and millions of people who didn't survive, who were killed, and whose families never grew, and we don't know what the world has lost.
The St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum is not just a place to view historical information about World War II. Across the lobby from the main exhibit, you can take part in a more interactive, facilitator-led experience called the Impact Lab.
A simple way to think of it is kind of what do we do about hate in our world? So where do we see where hate manifests itself? How do we see how people have historically been treated, but also explore our own identities, and ultimately what can we do about it? That's really the big driving part of the Impact Lab, is recognizing hate in our world and then taking that step to actually make real change. Right? This is a place where we're looking to find out what we could do better, but we may leave and not have all the answers, and that's okay. My job today is not to give you a tour, right? My job is to have a conversation with you.
The Impact Lab is a 90-minute exercise geared towards small groups aged middle school and above. The way it works is participants go through 3 main areas where they have conversations which promote understanding, starting with the spiral of hate.
Yeah, so the spiral of hate is a teaching tool we use here to really see where hate manifests itself in our world. So it has multiple levels, starting with stereotype.
A stereotype is a belief about a person based on real or imagined characteristics of a group,
which is the ideas in the world, how we treat other people. It moves then to prejudice,
which is having a preconceived opinion about a group that's not based on reason or actual experience,
which is taking that idea and making it an opinion. It moves down to discrimination, which is an action that's taken. Finally, violence and genocide. So the spiral shows how slippery of a slope it can be to have ideas about people and how they can move into action. But it also shows that we can make our way back.
The second room focuses on contemporary examples of victims of hate and how those victims, and in some cases their survivors, took action. And finally, participants are encouraged to look inward and see how they would react to particular scenarios and how they could react in a more positive way.
Beforehand, I was kind of thinking, oh yeah, I could probably do this, but then kind of seeing what other different situations that could actually apply to me, it started to seem like maybe I might not have my head screwed on all the way if I argue it.
I learned about different forms of hate and different examples of hate, and just how we can prevent this and how to be an active ally.
It was a really impactful opportunity. I kind of had my eyes opened to how the world is and what I can do to help be a part of making the world a better place.
For me, I think that's been the biggest takeaway from our audiences, is they feel this empowerment of, okay, I've been told I have to make a difference, but how do I actually do that? The Impact's here to help us practice actually doing that.
Saying you're going to do something and actually doing it, they're 2 very different things, and it's a lot harder to do one over the other. For example, anyone can talk a big game in literally anything. It could be robotics, football, hockey, I don't know, tennis. And nothing really matters until you're on the field, on the court, actually doing what you're supposed to do and proving that you can actually do things.
The hardest part is taking that first step, because I think for a lot of us, we kind of look at this idea of changing the world in really grand scales, and it's not always that. And you start with one person, and then gradually, as you build more and more allies, you can build a community of allies, and then it goes larger from there. So I think the key is not overestimating, not overshooting what you think you can do.
It makes me feel like I might just be a small person, but one person can create an impact that can affect everybody else.
It is that impact that UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was hoping for when he stated in 2008, "We must also go beyond remembrance and make sure that new generations know this history. We must apply the lessons of the Holocaust to today's world." Survivors George Spooner and Ilse Altman share their thoughts on doing just that as we end today's program. Thank you so much for joining us.
I think what you should take away is this, that hatred is taught. There isn't a single person in this room and anyone listening to us and watching us that is born with hatred. Hatred is taught. And we must overcome that to this day, because there are still Holocausts going on today, and there have been Holocausts going on. We must eliminate hatred if we can and speak of love.
And I asked all of you, every one of you, to make this world a better place. You know, when we emptied the concentration camps and World War II was over, we said never again. I don't think we learned our lesson. Listen to the news. Please, as you go up, or even today, make sure that you respect everyone. We're all God's children, and we have a right to live in peace and dignity.